ask her hard questions. Nah. Grill her. Nah. Should we start? That should be Anya. Tess? Vevehi mo ka pui o na lei ulua huluana I ke ala lipoa e ala e na manu hoa o ka lewa o ka manu o ka na manu o ka I na hoa I o ahi o na wahine I ka ai hawane I ka lau holu na pe Ki ka haki a manu lele koa e I ka pae mai I ka loa oe I ka papa a veo veo Aloha e, aloha e, aloha e Velina mai kākou I ke ia la kamahao, ma nei aina kaulana o ka iwi ula me ka makani pāmai o olau niu, e ano mākou I ke alo o ka hale ali'i o Pauahi, ka hale ho ike, ka waihona hoi o na mea makamai loa o ko kākou lahui. E ano mākou, na kupa, na mamo, na limahana o Kalaupapa National Historical Park. No Kalaupapa hoi I ka lai ma Molokai. Pāmai no ka ahu kapalili, ua halihali ia kākoa whau I ke ia puuhonua o ke kuka hoi no na hanana a na limahana e malama I ke ia aina o Kalaupapa. Aloha mai kākou. I bring the greetings of our kupuna of Molokai. I bring the greetings of those who walk amongst us and those who moiloa, who rest in the lands of Makanalua. Bring all of us into this blessed space and this opportunity to discuss and share. And for all of you to hear really about the wonderful things that are happening in Kalaupapa. And bring us all closer into that space of awareness and information. We're blessed to be here at Haleho Ike o Pihopa Bishop Museum, the repository of so many of precious things, the most valuable and treasured things to the Lahui of Hawaii and to other peoples across the Pacific. And same as our work in Kalaupapa, we are a repository, we are a collection of wonderful and precious memories, stories, iwi kupuna, the remnants and the future of our lahui. And the privilege we have to malama and steward all of these mea makamai, it doesn't come easy. It can be challenging, but it brings us great honor and pleasure. So aloha to all of you who are joining us, representing different agencies, different stakeholders. Aloha to the descendants of our patients. You here are the evidence of the sacrifice that they each made, and all of us connect to this story. And the way that story stays alive is by us taking on our kuleana, fulfilling that, and sharing it with you. So aloha. I'm going to introduce myself formally a little later, but I would like to invite the Superintendent of Kalaupapa National Historical Park for her opening remarks. Please welcome Superintendent Nancy Holman.
That's okay. The other mic isn't working, so I'm just going to stop over to this one. So good morning. I am a very enthusiastic speaker by nature, so I am going to use my notes a little bit this morning just to make sure I talk at a slow enough pace that you can all follow along. But mahalo for your time today. Again, my name is Nancy Holman. I'm the Superintendent of Kalaupapa National Historical Park. I've been there about 2.5 years. And I'll talk a little bit more about my background as we do the bigger introductions. I really want to acknowledge that each of you has a choice on how you spend your time, and we really appreciate that you've come out today to spend some time with us learning about the work of the park. We each play a very important and critical role in the present and future of Kalaupapa. I want to acknowledge that each of us is a steward in our own way. We're going to be talking specifically about the way that we steward with the National Park Service, but each of you carries a really important role too. Thank you for choosing to be engaged in our process and for taking time to gain additional knowledge about our management actions. So today is a reporting meeting. It's a requirement that came out of the compliance efforts around our general management plan. That general management plan, as many of you know, took a very long time. It was over 10 years in the making. It was signed in the summer of 2021. And again, through that process of looking at the compliance, a programmatic agreement was signed. That agreement had several requirements for the Park Service, and this is one of those requirements today. So you have, when you checked in, you were given a list of all the projects from all the streamlined review projects, and we'll talk about what that means to be a streamlined review project today with you. But that list includes all of those projects from August 31st, 2022 to December 31st, 2023. We're going to be talking and walking you through what the compliance process looks like when we do streamlined review, so you have a sense of how that work actually looks. And again, this is a reporting meeting, so keep that in mind as we go. And a requirement that people asked us to do, so you had a sense of how that work is accomplished and what work is actually accomplished through that process. So I'm truly humbled and honored to share some of our park staff with you today, so from Kalaupapa National Historical Park, and their stewardship accomplishments, which we'll be talking through throughout the day, but also we'll note some of those specific accomplishments at the end. Each of these staff members represents a real continuum of care that's been in place at Kalaupapa for decades and centuries before even those of us that are here today. Our role as the Park Service is to ensure that the history of Kalaupapa is preserved and that it continues to inspire people long into the future. So we have a very specific role. The National Park Service team represents, again, that continuum of care. My role as the superintendent is to carry out and accomplish the park's purpose, which was enacted by the United States Congress through the strategic use of staff, funds, and partners. This is a really significant time in the history of Kalaupapa. There's a lot of change taking place, as many of you know. There are slow shifts in the dynamics of the community makeup in Kalaupapa, as well as our surrounding communities. The Park Service staff has been changing over the last handful of years, and there are a lot of planning efforts taking place at the community level, at the National Park Service level, and throughout all of the state agencies involved as well. The park team embodies a high quality of stewardship that includes the pride in their home, the community, and the National Park Service. And you'll get to experience today that they take this kuleana very seriously. I continue to commit staff resources to recruitment, staff development, planning, documentation, reporting, and assessment that goes well beyond the Secretary of Interior's standards for historic preservation, the National Environmental Protection Act, which is NEPA, and the National Historic Preservation Act, so NHPA, which we'll be talking more about how we use those today. Over the last few years, the Park Service has added additional positions to support our planning and compliance efforts, and we continue to develop the existing staff in their positions to enhance their local, technical, and policy knowledge. This is reflected in the staff's ability to have respectful and open discussion and do inclusive problem solving on a daily basis. Today we will share with you how the Parks team of professionals use a variety of the tools to plan, execute, and evaluate stewardship efforts. Each time we go through this process, we take what we learn into the next process, and I hope you'll get to see that as we walk through some things today. NEPA and NHPA are tools that strengthen our capacity to articulate the work that is needed, discuss concerns, limitations, and mitigations, and ultimately negotiate how best to accomplish that work. It also helps us document and follow up on how that work was performed. Much of this is reflected in the supporting documents we've shared with you again today. So again, that list of projects, you'll see how we do that. It's important to remember that NEPA and NHPA are process laws. They help guide and help us guide and document informed discussions and decision making. So streamlined review process, I just want to make a note about that. This is a process that has been formally vetted at the national level, and it helps you, hopefully when you hear more about it today, feel more confident and comfortable with that decision making resting at the park technical level, as opposed to everything having to go beyond the government to be approved to move forward. So all these things are in place to support government accountability and transparency, but also put the work where the technical expertise lays. Much of that stewardship work we do, even on that list before you today, is routine, meaning we do the same work the same way on a regular basis. Think about things like groundskeeping or even some of the preservation work we do on buildings. This routine work is covered under that streamlined review process. And again, that's what's on your list. In other cases where we have larger projects, mostly big infrastructure projects like our electrical distribution grid replacement project that we're working through right now, we utilize the standard 4-step process. That process you're probably more familiar with. That includes consultation with Native Hawaiian organizations, our agency partners, and the broader civic engagement with the community. And again, although this is a reporting meeting, hopefully when you checked in today, you were provided with some paper and something to write with. So if you have questions that come to mind along the way, please write them down. We're not going to be taking questions during our presentation today, just to respect everybody's time and energy. We will be doing breakout sessions at the end, so that way you can get your questions answered directly by our subject matter experts and get more of the questions answered in the time that we have. Also, just a note that civic engagement, as you all know, because you chose to spend time today to come out here and be with us and share your knowledge and energy and time, it doesn't always have to happen in those formal 4-step process. At any time, please, if you have questions or you have information you'd like to share with us, or concerns, you can reach out to us at any time. It doesn't need to be in a formalized process at all. So if you have questions that don't pertain to today, or comments or concerns that don't pertain to this reporting meeting and our streamlined review projects, again, write them down. If there's time at the end when we do those breakouts, we'll be available to answer them. But if we can't at this point, just from time, or we don't have the right team with us today, we'll be sure to take those questions back with us and be reaching back out to you later. But at any time, you can reach out to us, not just in that formalized four-step process with our projects. So please keep that in mind. And again, I really appreciate your coming out today. We know it's a big ask to spend a couple hours with us. I hope it's worthwhile. I think we will really walk you through the process so you can maybe have some of those fears or anxieties relieved, that you have a big team of experts that are doing the stewardship work on your behalf. I turn this back over to Michaela.
Mahalo, Superintendent. All right. Just a little housekeeping. If you're not familiar with this building, the restrooms are at the back. We have some refreshments if you need some water, snacks there, and anything else you might need help with, or any of the handouts or resources, please see Jessica front here. And again, those little question slips look like this. All right. So all of our projects, well, all the work is crafted, it's identified, and it's brought forward by our subject matter experts. They're identified by our subject matter experts who are the boots on the ground. They work in different fields, and they span the entire peninsula. And I want to introduce them individually because each of them come with a special set of experience. Their skill set and their role is really important to understand, so that you can see that when we're building the projects, who's representing each and every one of you, and what is that field of expertise that's coming in at the different points or stages of project development. So the first 4 people that I would like to introduce come from our facilities management team, and that will be our historic preservation specialist, Joseph Kayama, our utilities, Eddie English, and Joseph Molena, and our facility management specialist, Paoneli Namakaeha. We'll have them 4 go first.
Hello, my name is Joseph Kayama. I am in charge of historic preservation. I handle all the buildings, and we do all the formats to make it to what it used to look like.
Your background.
Oh, my background. I'm from Molokai. I was born and raised there. Been there for generations. My family's been there for generations. I worked my young adult life in Salt Lake City, Utah for numbers of years. I came back to the islands in late 90s, and I started with the Park Service in 2003 and been there ever since.
Aloha. My name is Edward English. I was born and raised on the island of Molokai. I first went down to Kalaupapa to work in 1987, and from there, I started as a maintenance worker, and we do a lot of other jobs, assist like the plumbing, the carpenters, the electricians. And then in 2009, I became the operator for the state that takes care of the landfill. And then in 2007, 2007, I became the electrician for the national park. And just recently, I became the high voltage electrician.
Hello, my name is Joe Molena, born and raised on the island of Molokai. I first started with the Park Service in 1999. First started as a 4-year term as a maintenance worker. Then after the 4 years, I got hired with the Historic Preservation as a carpenter for 7 years. After that, I went back to the maintenance as a plumber helper. And then in 2016, I took my water operator license, got certified. So now I'm the utility operator for the Park Service. So I take care of the water system and also do auto plumbing.
Good morning. My name is Poone Lina Makaeha. I am from Molokai. I am a graduate of Molokai High Intermediate School. My family is from Molokai. I started my career in 2007 with the National Park Service working as a painter. And then I've worked my way up to a supervisor with managing several different divisions in the facility maintenance department. I have a master's degree in environmental policy and management with a major in energy and sustainability.
And we also brought along with us today members of our cultural resource management team. We have Dustin and Katie.
Aloha, my name is Katie Matthew. I'm the museum curator at Kalaupapa. What my job is I take care of the hundreds and thousands of objects that are in our museum repository. That includes archaeological items, paper documents, historical material, and a small natural history collection. My museum career started with the National Park Service back in 2008. I have worked for both state and local museums and also university museums. I came to Kalaupapa about 3 years ago, and before that I worked at Haleakala for a couple years.
Thanks. Aloha everyone, my name is Dustin Robbins. I'm the archaeologist at Kalaupapa. I am in charge of archaeological survey as well as archaeological monitoring for projects that we have ongoing. I also do the National Historic Preservation Act review for compliance projects that we're working on. And a little bit about my background. I started working with the National Park Service at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park on Hawaii Island. I spent 10 years there as an archaeologist before leaving the service to go back to school at Manoa for my master's, where I focused on dryland agricultural field systems, which there's a large dryland field system at Kalaupapa. During that time, I also worked with a private company here on Oahu, International Archaeology, around Hawaii and throughout the Pacific before returning to the Park Service about 3 years ago to become the archaeologist at Kalaupapa. Thanks.
Also joining us today for representing our natural resource management team is Kelly Moore.
Good morning. My name is Kelly Moore. I have the privilege of serving the park as the marine ecologist or marine biologist. I study the ocean and conduct long-term monitoring down there. I was born and raised on a small island off the coast of Southern California called Santa Catalina Island. So I have a fondness for islands, island living, small communities. I joined this team in discussions on projects that pertain to our marine resources or our aquatic resources and our streams and our crater. That's my expertise, kind of ocean resources, marine resource management. I also serve at the regional level overseeing all of our dive programs in the Pacific West region of the National Park Service. So those include programs in Lake Mead, Crater Lake, Samoa, all throughout our region. So I get to work with a lot of divers and programs throughout different parks, which I really love. So I bring a lot of expertise when it comes to dive programs and boating operations as well. Thanks for having us.
Thanks. I would like to introduce the next two members of our team, Ranger Justin Newhart, followed by our support staff, Jessica.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Justin Newhart. Like many of my coworkers, I'm from Molokai as well. I'm a United States Park Ranger in the Visitor and Resource Protection Division. Started my career in the Park Service 2014, so it's been about 10 years now. As a ranger, we're tasked with providing all the emergency response in the settlement, or the Kalaupapa settlement, that includes law enforcement, structural fire, wildland fire, search and rescue, and EMS.
Velina mai ke aloha o Vaono o Jessica Kanani Sanchez, no Molokai Imayau. Aloha everybody, my name is Jessica Kanani Sanchez, born and raised on the island of Molokai. I get a little script too, sorry. I am the grandchild of patients, the late Lorenzio and the late Catherine Kanani Casales, the late Henry Nalaielua, and the late Clarence Boogie, and the late Ivy Kahiliwa. I am the administrative support assistant, and one of my duties that I do to support our team is the property manager. So I do disposals, manage inventories. I also help with reviewing and signing purchase requests so that our staff can get items through the barge or Kamaka Air. And I am also like the IT person. And if you guys didn't understand what I just said, I'm the behind the scenes person. So, mahalo.
Mahalo. Someone who's not joining us today, but is a very critical member of our team, is our planner. Her name is Amy Bailey, and she works remotely. She's a new addition to the team, about a year now. And her job is to make sure that we're all doing our jobs. And so she's sort of the wrangler of information and making sure that all the pieces are completed, are fully complete, and are inputted and are being recorded properly, and that we're making all the connections and that we need to. And she really helps to keep the conversations going when we're, besides doing this bit of work, we have all these other programs to manage and activities and staff to supervise. So she helps keep this moving smoothly, and that has been a big step forward in our effectiveness in managing our planning and compliance process. So aloha to Amy. At the next level, we have what we call the interdisciplinary team, and those are the set of managers that our participation is mandatory. Our superintendent has put together this structure to make sure that not just the requirements are being met, but we're doing right by Kalaupapa by making sure as many perspectives and as many eyes are looking through and reviewing these projects from every angle. So I'm going to introduce some of those members now. We'll start, because you're closest, with Amy.
Aloha, my name is Amy Sakurada. I'm the Chief Ranger of Visitor and Resource Protection at Kalaupapa. 27 years with the Park Service. I had the opportunity in 2007 to move back to Molokai, and as a park ranger, similar to what Justin started with, and have been there ever since. And then back in 2013 had the opportunity to move into a chief ranger position and take on more of a management role there. Let's see. Been part of the compliance process for close to 13 years now. So, yeah, I think that's it. Next.
Mahalo. The next two people will be Ka'ohulani and Lynn On, our resource managers.
Aloha, my name is Ka'ohulani McGuire, and I'm very privileged to be the cultural anthropologist at Kalaupapa since 2009. I was born in Molokai and was raised there until I was 11. And then when I was little, my parents used to take me to Pala'au Lookout, and I'd look out over the settlement. And they would tell me stories about Kalaupapa because I had family relatives that were sent there on both my father's side and my mother's side. I also wear several other hats at Kalaupapa. I am the division lead for cultural resources since April 2021. And I am also the acting 106 coordinator for the park, and I'll tell you more about what those duties entail a little later on.
Hi, everyone. My name is Linon Kat. I'm Kaulani's counterpart in the Natural Resources Management Division. I bring 4 years of experience working with the National Park Service back in California. I'm very privileged to work with Native Hawaiian staff on the terrestrial side of the program. Kelly, who introduced herself earlier, handles all of the marine resources, and we have another staff member on that team. But one thing I'm really grateful for working at Kalaupapa is there's a lot of people here with amazing natural resource management knowledge. So my role is really to bridge that with the policies, laws, and guidance of National Park Service and figuring out how we navigate that in the space of Kalaupapa, and also figuring out how we go through the compliance process, other approval processes that are involved in the natural resource management realm, which we'll touch on a little bit later, and getting people the funding and other support they might need to do the good work that they're actually currently doing right now in Kalaupapa while we're here sharing some of the work we do in compliance to get these projects started.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Padgett. I'm a facility manager at Kalaupapa. That means I basically oversee the maintenance division and have the great fortune of working with these folks here. I was born and raised on the island of Maui. I started my career with the National Park Service in 2001 as an entry-level laborer at Haleakala National Park. Did that for about 20 years. And then, about a year and a half ago, I had the great fortune of being selected for my current position. So our role, in brief, my role is to just oversee utilities, building maintenance, historic preservation, roads and trail maintenance, and just make sure that these folks have the resources they need to get their job done to steward the park and honor the legacy of all those people who came before us.
All right. Again, Nancy Holman, Park Superintendent. I'll talk a little bit about the background that I bring with me to this work. So I have my academic background is in marine biology, as well as organizational development. I have spent over 20 years working in the National Park Service. Before I came to the National Park Service, I worked in the nonprofit sector as well as county and state parks. And I would say, although I'm an educator by calling, I have worked a lot in the field of interpretation and education of public lands. In the last 15 to 20 years, most of the work I have done is around transition management. So I get hired to come into sites and help teams and parks and communities transition into something new. It's complex, difficult work, especially here at Kalaupapa, where there are so many passionate advocates for Kalaupapa and so many different types of stakeholders. So often we have one group or one purpose at a site, and because Kalaupapa has brought so many people to its land over such a long period of time, there are so many different voices to hold space for and to try to broker that compromise in the middle of how we might work forward together. I've done a lot of work in the last 2 years with this particular team. When I came on board, over 2/3 of the management team had transitioned out of their positions. So I've been working really hard to fill vacancies, to develop the team into their roles, and to understand more about the Park Service policy so they can serve you.
I need my hands. Formal introduction. My name is Miki Ala Pescaya. I am the child of Reynolds Lealoha Ayao and Renette Moanike Ala Igarta. I'm the granddaughter of Harriet Ahiona Ayao Ne, born in Pelekunu on the backside of Molokai. Her parents were born there, her grandparents, her great-grandparents. So my mo'oku'auhaua is very firmly planted in the Ko'olau side of Molokai. She was an orator, a storyteller, and that's where I get the privilege of carrying and holding all of the mo'olelo of our people. Ho'olehua homesteader, born and raised Molokai, went away to school, and finally found my way back in 2001 at a tenured position with the University of Hawaii. Could have been set for life. I walked away to take a chance on this really small opportunity that has now grown into a very big kuleana at Kalaupapa. Working for the National Park Service can be a sort of controversial role to hold in such a vibrant and active Molokai political community. We really care. And the reason why I was able to make that decision is because I knew I could make a difference. And one of the things that worked in our favor, or in my favor anyway, is that our enacting legislation that established the park actually has it written in that we can preference Native Hawaiians for employment opportunities, and that we are also mandated to train them up and give them these opportunities to rise up to the levels of leadership. And why that's really important for me, and if I wanted other people to take advantage of that, I needed to step in and test the system out. And I'm going to say that I started as a park ranger back in 2014, and I just accepted the position early this year of being the community engagement specialist. And that position didn't exist before, but we're recognizing as we're building out our team and preparing for the future that we need someone specifically in a role to work through building these relationships that sort of were informal or maybe guided in different processes, but we want to really focus on something new and something productive and something that we all can feel really good about. And Molokaians should be in that process. And so I'm not sure if you had a chance to take a look at this handout. It says Kalaupapa at a glance. And I just wanted to call out on the side that because of that enacting legislation, of our 37 permanent staff, 80% of us are Native Hawaiian, and we're from Molokai. And why I want to call that out is oftentimes people look at the agency for what they represent, and you should, but also embedded in there is a whole 80% of our staff show up every day to their job holding the mo'okuauhau, holding the mo'olelo, holding that space. And we're not just accountable to all the laws and the guidance, but we're accountable to the kupuna who go and pa'i us if we make a mistake or we let them down. And I want us to work with taking that, knowing that as the foundation of a conversation, because we're not talking about strangers who are making decisions. We're talking about people that have been here for a long time. And if you do the math and you add up all the years of expertise, all the years of connection, all the layers and all those genealogical lines, we have a really, really great opportunity to craft plans, management plans, and a future that really can make space for everyone to be heard. And it should be a safe space. And we're going to work on building those spaces. So that's going to be my job. Look forward to seeing me and hearing me more often. Remember my name, Miki'ala Peskaya. I am easy to find, as our superintendent said. If you have questions, curiosities about the park, I know that we are not as accessible as some people would like us to be, and there's some really good reasons behind some of those aspects, but they're all things that are in the works. There's movement. There's nothing just standing still. And as agencies, we have to stay within our enacting legislation. So there are things that are within our control and things that are not within our control. Sometimes it looks like it's in our control because we're the ones present, but there are a lot of other agencies involved who don't have as much of a physical presence on the peninsula, but they're involved as well. That's for another day's conversation. Today, our conversation, though, is focused around this programmatic agreement, which asks us or requires us to present what's the work you've been doing, who gets to determine the work, who's carrying out the work, what are their qualifications, and tell us more about it. And so instead of just handing out spreadsheets and data, we rather bring the mo'olelo. I wanted to bring my fellow staff here so that we can look you in the eye, and because every single project on this list, they know by heart because they are the ones who designed it, evaluated it, they check each other, and then we came up with this best plan. And as Superintendent said, the 73 projects that went through the streamline, they were deemed streamlined. So like she said, those categories are things that are going to be low risk, they're already mitigated, and if they meet those criteria, the review and the design and the evaluation of that happens in-house. And so that list, it's like color-coded, it's like several pages long. You might look at those project titles and be wondering, like, I want to know what this means, right? Mark it down. When we go into breakout sessions, we can talk story with these divisions and learn. We want to share the stories about these projects because we're really proud. So we thought we'd take a look at the anatomy of a project and like really what happens. So compliance is this one step where we check and make sure that everything is in alignment or is legal and is proper. But the process starts all the way back. It starts with our staff being out if they're in facilities maintenance, they're looking and assessing at their buildings, they're looking if they're in resource management, they're working with their with those resources, and they're going to identify issues that need to be addressed. I'm going to ask Matt Paget, our facility manager, to maybe to separate out and make it more clear. There's some things that we call cyclic maintenance, and then there's planned projects. So maybe you can kind of share with us what the difference is?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me say that if we're doing everything right, the majority of the work that we will do would fall into the category of cyclic maintenance. So what that means is that every year we have a building assessment or assessment of the utility, and we're looking at all of the components: roof, foundation, walls, paint, everything. Cyclic projects are designed to replace a component as it reaches the end of its lifespan. So we have lifespans for all these components. We plan the work. We try to get that done before the system fails, before there's a problem. The other category of projects are ones where, for whatever reason, the components have failed. We've gone too long, or there's been some reason why we weren't able to get to that project. So we're going to talk specifically about a project that we did at the Lightkeepers houses. That's at the sort of Makanalua side of the peninsula toward the airport. And those houses had been privately owned at one time, I guess you could say, or not privately owned, but privately occupied. They are the few of the structures that we actually own on the peninsula that is actually NPS owned. And so we went in and looked at those buildings, and we noticed that several of the major components were failing. I want to ask Joe Kayama if he could tell us a little bit about the carpentry work that you identified as being needed to be done.
Hello. Like Matt said, we would do a site visit, and we'd go through the site and we'd note down, and then we'd do a condition assessment. We would see what components is failing. So like say rafters, we would go through and figure out what needs to be done and at what extent its damages. Because our weather and our termites, they really get a handle on those buildings down there. And then we go through the steps and figuring out what we're going to do and move forward with that.
Yeah, in the case of those buildings, there were multiple systems that had problems. The roof had some leaks. There were rotten wood components throughout, flooring issues, sinks, fixtures, cabinets, countertops. All that stuff was kind of in a state of beyond repair, and so we identified those as needing work. Eddie, can you tell me a little bit about what the electrical system was like before we did the work?
When I walk through the area, I look to the outside and I work my way inside. But the outside, I see the main panel that comes in is a little rusted, caused by salt air that we have here. And then some of the floodlights that needs to be changed. So then I walk my way inside. I see the outlets and lighting systems that need to be changes, and wirings need to be changes. We're bringing it up all to safety code.
And maybe Joe Molina can tell us about the plumbing systems.
As a plumber, I first inspect the exterior, check the PSI, see how much pressure that house has. Then I look around the building, check the hose bibs, check the drains, check the vents. Then I work my way into the building, check the sinks, the drains. And some of these buildings has historical valves. So I usually try and open the valves, take a look, see if we have those kind of valves in kind. If not, we got a special. But other than that, those pipes are the house was all galvanized, exterior, interior, and also the drain was cast iron.
Thank you, Joe. So all in all, we assembled all this information about what work needed to be done, and we began to create a project to accomplish that work. And this was a collaborative process within our maintenance division, but while we're designing that project, we're also informally consulting with our natural resource manager, our cultural resource manager, our archaeologist, to identify things that might be not obstacles, to identify issues that might arise. And if we can do that early in the process before we bring it into the formal compliance process, I think we'd end up with a better product, and it's also a more efficient way to operate. And so once we have that information, I design the project, I bring it to what we call the interdisciplinary team, the IDT, consisting of subject matter experts. And we go through the project, we talk through potential issues that might arise from a Section 106 perspective, from a NEPA perspective. And then at that point, we'll put it into PEPC, which is the Project Environmental Planning public comment, sorry. We use the acronym all the time, so I always forget. Pepsi makes me thirsty. Then so maybe, would you guys like to talk about? Yeah.
I'll talk about the next step in the process. So once it comes to the interdisciplinary team and it's approved, it's put into the system, as Matt said, into Pepsi. And at that point, that's for myself, because I represent cultural resources. That's what I'm looking at, considering the cultural resources, looking at where the work is happening. Is it just internal inside the building, or is it happening outside as well, which might affect the cultural landscape? I'm looking at cultural resources reports, the cultural landscape inventory report, and also the National Historic Landmark nomination, to see what that says about that lighthouse area. And as with my 106 coordinator hat, I'm looking also at what recommendation I would make for this project. Does it meet the nationwide programmatic PA agreement? And if it does meet all the criteria, then I can recommend streamlined. If not, I would automatically have to recommend a standard 4-step process, which would involve the State Historic Preservation Division input. With my anthropology hat, I'm looking at, because part of my job is that I'm a bridge between the Park Service and the patient community, so I'm also looking at the project through that lens. Would the patients have any concerns about this project? If I'm not sure, I would go and talk to them personally about that specific project. So I'm doing a review in the Pepsi system. This is where we formally document everything that happens for the project. And I would also pass it over to Dustin to fill out the NHPA form, and I'll let him talk about that.
So from an archaeological perspective, the first thing that I want to look at is what are the proposed treatments and actions involved in the project, and is there any potential for disturbing archaeological resources? Is there any potential for ground disturbance, Does there need to be excavation, say, of outside utilities? In some cases there is, and in those situations we have to develop mitigations, could be archaeological monitoring, could be making suggestions for changes to the project. In this situation and in many situations with the historic structures, everything is internal and there's not really an archaeological concern. In that situation, I also go to the National Historic Preservation Act and I complete a form that documents the decisions and the considerations we made, and whether we want to, as Ka'ohulani mentioned, recommend a streamlined pathway for the project, and under what exception will that pathway be recommended. I'll hand it back to you, Ka'ohulani, for the next steps.
So the next step in the process, after we do our internal reviews with natural resources and cultural resources, and Dustin will put in his review in the NHPA, then we would submit it to our regional staff, who also support us and advise us for disciplines that we don't have in the park. And so those regional staff include people that represent the National Historic Landmark Program. We have historians that know about Kalaupapa, and we have a cultural landscape architect to comment on the cultural landscape, and a historical architect that will comment on the actual, if it involves a building, they will comment on the building repair itself. And that also, they would also put in if there are any recommendations or mitigations to the projects that we should consider. And then after that whole process, it goes and it's approved by everyone. If everyone is in agreement, it next goes to the superintendent to sign off on the project. And at that point, then the project can move forward. I think I'll have you talk about the NEPA process. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so during this process that we're talking about with the National Historic Preservation Act, there's also an equivalent for natural resources, and it's called the National Environmental Protection Act. If you go to these types of meetings, you might hear the term NEPA thrown out. That's the National Environmental Protection Act. And we have a similar process as streamlined review versus the standard 4-step process, and we call those categorical exclusions. So those are a list of really specific actions that, again, have also been cleared at a national level for us to do without more extensive review. That being said, for this project, redoing these 2 historic buildings by our lighthouse in Kalaupapa, from a NEPA perspective, you're thinking about if there's outside work, are there threatened or endangered species in the area, are there any other considerations that we might think about? It rains here, is there something downstream we should, consider? For this particular project, when we discussed it with our interdisciplinary team, there were not any major national environmental policy act or, natural resource concerns. So we didn't put any specific mitigations in for this. And then just to cover, if you're not familiar with the term mitigations, these are just actions that we actually put in a documented place that the public can look at, that we take to make sure our natural and cultural resources are protected. And we do this for every single project. This project we're talking about right now with the historic structures, but look at that list of 73 projects, and these discussions are done multiple times for each of those projects. So we signed off on that. Ka'ohulani brought all the paperwork to Nancy. We cleared it. The project started, and I'm going to hand it over to Matt to hand it over to Nancy to talk about that.
So, again, I talked a little bit about the role of the superintendent earlier. In this process, so I do the final signature as the superintendent, and what I'm looking for is there any documented need for mitigation? Have we clearly articulated what those are? Have we clearly articulated why it's been streamlined or why we're going through the 4-step process? But also, in particular, we bring all these meetings, all these projects through an actual meeting where the staff comes together. So we might have a project representative. So in this case, we had Joe Kayama, Joe Molena, and Eddie English come to that IDT of the management team, explain the project to us, and we had open dialogue during that conversation. So I sit through those meetings to listen for what is the staff talking about, what are the staff not talking about during this project. I ask critical questions along with our planner to make sure that conversation's moving forward and everybody feels comfortable with any concerns or issues with that project and that any mitigations are documented. So when I'm going through those forms at the end of the day to sign them, I'm rereading through that, taking into consideration all of those things I've heard and seen along the way before I put my name at the bottom of that form to sign off.
Yeah, so once that's done, Nancy signed off on it. Now we are approved from a compliance perspective to carry out the project. So at that point, I put in a request to our regional fund manager who manages the monies for that kind of project for National Park Service. They give me the funding, and then Joe, Eddie, and Joe will begin to order materials, get that all going. That's a whole long process that we could talk about. As you know, we have one barge per year, so anything that can't fit on a Cessna Caravan has to come in on the barge. And so we have to be extremely accurate about what we order. We have to anticipate issues in advance to make sure that we have the materials we need. If we get it wrong, these guys will have to fabricate stuff in the shop to make it work. And that's a whole process that they do that is actually very, very impressive. So once we got the materials, we begin the work on the project, and then we found that we had some pests in the attic. Yeah, Joe?
When we went to the rafters, we got into some pest controls. So there was a lot of rats, and they're destroying the building. And so we had to ask our NRM folks. So she got us some bug juice to get rid of them. So anyway.
Linan, can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yes, so Kayama reached out to me and told me about these, I think they were massive rats in the rafters. I think I remember hearing a lot about how large they were. And so they were working on renovating the building. They knew the rats were up in the rafters. They were not leaving. They eventually will have to, in this work, seal up the rafters, and we don't want to obviously seal up these massive rats in the rafters. And so this is okay. Sometimes when we go through this planning process and this process law for National Environmental Policy Act and National Historic Preservation Act, there are emerging things that come up in the project that even though we have these series of discussions, we just don't anticipate them. And that's okay. So we brought that back to the compliance team. With National Park Service, there's also additional processes outside of compliance. So anytime we use a pesticide, we have to get approval from our regional office. So we wrote up what we needed. So we used these rodenticide blocks. We proposed using that. And that went through this whole process that everyone talked about. We went through it again to add this onto the project. And we did have mitigations this time. So what that looked like was notifying the community members down at Kalaupapa, the dates and areas we were using these blocks near the house to draw out the rats from the rafters. That way they weren't taking their pets in that area because rats consume that rodenticide, and in other areas of the country that National Park Service works, there's a lot of concern because they can be eaten, and that can cause some really serious effects for other animals in the area. We don't have that issue in most of Hawaii, so that was okay, but we did want to let people know, don't take your pets in that area. If you do, have them on leash and, watch what they're doing. So those are some of the mitigations we put in place, had that compliance approved, put it through this other process to get the pesticide use approved. And as all of that was going on, Kayama and his crew were still working on finishing up the house so that once that was approved, we could draw the rats out and then seal up the rafters and not have those rats be trapped up there.
Yep, so got rid of the rats, completed the work on the building, or the buildings. Incidentally, our staff won a national level award for the quality of that project, which was really awesome. Joe Kayama in particular was recognized for that, and his crew. Okay, so we got the building done. The rats are gone. We're done, right? There's one more step to any construction project, which is the waste at the end, and at Kalaupapa, that's extra complex. So I'm going to ask Pa'one to talk about that.
One of the challenges we face in Kalaupapa is managing the waste generated in the park. We have no landfills in Kalaupapa, so waste generated there is either exported via air or ocean carrier. Our household trash goes out once a week on Kamaka Air and gets disposed here at H Power. And larger projects that take C&D waste, any scrap appliance, vehicles, you name it, goes out on our once-a-year barge sailing. It goes out to one of our contracted vendors and it gets properly disposed, whether it's a hazardous waste or non-hazardous waste, a universal waste. That way we are managing all of our waste basically from cradle to grave.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the process would be if there was, for instance, lead paint debris?
If we are doing a paint project, lead-based paint is captured into 55-gallon drums. We send out some paint samples to analyze Hawaii here so we can know the baseline lead amount levels in there. Anything over 5 mgl is considered a hazardous waste, and we would treat that as a hazardous material, and our hazardous waste contract would receive that. Those drums here on Oahu, and they would export that to their vendor, which most likely would be on the mainland, and that gets incinerated. So we're ensuring we encapsulating and properly handling and disposing all of the waste we generate in the park.
Thank you. And I would just add that because most of, probably 95% of our buildings are over 50 years old, lead paint and asbestos are present in most of them. So this is an added complexity that we have. Oh, and then one more step, and Justin's going to talk about that.
All right, so after all the extensive work has been done, one of the last pieces of the puzzle is to conduct a life safety inspection. These inspections are conducted on an annual basis. Essentially, it is a fire inspection, so myself as well as the structural fire brigade we have in the park, we conduct these assessments. We're checking if all the doors, windows are operational. We have fire extinguishers up to code, fire alarms, smoke detectors are in place, making sure emergency vehicles have access to the residents as well as the fire hydrants, and essentially just making sure it is safe and livable as it is a residence in Kalaupapa.
Perfect. Hi, so working in the museum, I get to see a lot of really cool and interesting things, and some of those things are the architectural fragments and things that come from our buildings. And the reason why we collect pieces of wood or paint samples or even light fixtures is to just help us have a better record of these materials as things are getting maybe replaced because they're broken. A lot of times they'll ask me if we have any documentation of what the building looked like painted. And a lot of those photos are from like the early 1900s, and if anyone knows, black and white photos don't really help with figuring out what the paint color is. So just having samples like that just help us with this process of making sure we're properly preserving these buildings. Anything else we need to add to the scope of this project? Who didn't get to talk it? No, just kidding. I hope this demonstrates how many touch points our different staff members have on a project from the beginning to the end. My job, this project is pretty straightforward, but compliance applies to all kinds of projects. You look on that list. Some of them allow me to bring in a cultural lens. Sometimes there are assets in the park that, while they might have a technical or mechanical value and component to it, the cultural, and I'm going to use Native Hawaiian culture versus cultural in the scientific or academic sense. But the Hawaiian-ness of something is an element that doesn't get overlooked either. Ka'ohulani and I look at the the sentimental value for our patients and those little things that we might think, oh, it's just a doorknob or it's just this little thing and it's rusted and it's falling off. But if we recognize that we have a story behind that, we have photographs and we're consulting with Katie, do we have documentation for that? What happens to those pieces that need to be preserved or removed or somehow captured? And then it's sharing that out with our community. And oftentimes Kalaupapa itself, people forget that Kalaupapa has a community as well. And it's not just everybody else outside who cares about Kalaupapa. On the ground, they often don't, they're so present that sometimes they get overlooked for consultation, if that makes sense. Because we think, well, if you had you should have said something, you know, or we like informally like solicit this information, which is what Ka'ahulani and I do out in, because we have other members of the Kalaupapa community who don't work for the Park Service. We have Department of Health staff, we have Department of Transportation, we have the U.S. Postal Service, we have the ecclesiastical members, the people associated with the churches. There's these different elements of our community, and sometimes it's easy for us to just be bound by this system. But again, because we're small and intimate, and we can look across at each other and say, I'm going to make room for that voice to be heard. Please share that information with us. Because as great as we all are with collecting this data, there's always room for more. And with 8,000 patients spanning a 103-year span of the law and an additional 55 years after that, even though we're a National Historical Park, every day history is being made. Every day, while we still have our kupuna present, is a day of history being made. And it's challenging sometimes to be responsible for taking care of that, for stewarding that without influencing that, and allowing our patients to live in a way that every other patient was allowed to live, allowing them to exercise their voice, their presence, their opinions, and making sure that just because there's this transition happening, it doesn't mean the world closes in on them. We keep it as wide open, as fully functioning, as familiar. Something as little as if Eddie changes the power lines, it changes the sound of the wind blowing through that line. And it is so quiet in Kalaupapa that the patients notice. What happened to that tree? You know, and they're not afraid to come and share their thoughts with us. And along with the thoughts, though, is a history, is these stories that we never got to hear before. And it's a wonderful opportunity because not everybody who does historic preservation has access to the first-hand account, the primary source to tell us exactly what this was and be able to trust us enough to share that information. And so it is not just about the titles we hold, but it's this extra capacity of trying to engage with them. So that same intimacy, the same sort of trust and relationship we have with our kupuna and the other members of our Kalaupapa community, that's what we're trying to build here as well. Because you are an extension of our community outside of the shores of Kalaupapa. And so hopefully just us being able to be a little more transparent, and we kind of don't think our work is glamorous or exciting. So sometimes, you know, nobody hear about that. And we've learned that people do because they want to understand. And if we understand process, we all know how to show up and support the work better. Also for future planning of what's going to happen to Kalaupapa. If we understand what it takes to take care of Kalaupapa, what's there, how much money, how much energy, what are the challenges with waste management, with safety, or all of these elements, is going to inform all of our conversations moving forward. So presenting this information in this manner is really intentional so that we look forward to having more robust conversations after this. So on that list, you'll see there's like we mentioned, 73 projects. They kind of break down into these different categories of streamline review activities. They're sort of, the bulk of our work is under preservation, maintenance, and repair of historic properties. So those would be the buildings. There's work, sometimes we have deer. The deer are running around, kicking over rocks on the rock walls. We have those little spills. We have mitigations to repair the little wall spills. The next bulk of our work is around health and safety activities. We have work around the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. And the last big category is the maintenance or replacement of non-historical utility lines, transmission lines, and fences. And with that, I think we're going to ask Liran to maybe share a little bit about the fence project, if you don't mind.
So one of the projects on this list is a huge project that we got funded along with Haleakala National Park and Hawaii Volcanoes National Park by the Great America Outdoors Act. It's a project that allows us to repair 9 miles of fencing within the Kalaupapa Peninsula and Kukai'awa'a Peninsula. It's a really exciting project because it's about $1.5 million, and we were able to find a local crew, local to Molokai, to do all of that work for us, which is great because the other 2 parks, they're not as lucky as us. They're not having local crews come in. They're having contractors, but James Espanola of Department of Land and Natural Resources will be leading a crew of Native Hawaiian Molokai boys who are going to be redoing 9 miles of fencing, and they're hired through the Research Consortium or Research Corporation of the University of Hawaii. They will be starting that work this summer in May. And the reason this is one of the streamlined activities, even though it's a big project, is because it's replacing fence lines that already exist in the park. So there's very, very minimal ground disturbance. We're replacing poles in place. We had archaeological surveys all done in advance of scoping out the project. And because there is replacement of many of those fence poles, Dustin, our archaeologist, will be there doing archaeological monitoring for all of that work. So I just want to give that as an example because even though these are streamlined projects, those mitigations we were talking about, we put in place for this. So there's many layers of discussion, many actions we put into place to make sure we're protecting everything that's really special and unique about Kalaupapa. And we're just very excited about that project. It's going to be going on for the next 3 summers down at the park. And just very excited that we're bringing in some of the local community to do that actual work and then share out what this new fencing design down at the peninsula will look like.
So I just want to call out real quick that kind of along with that, we have a number of projects that we partner with other agencies like NOAA or the USGS. Because of Kalaupapa's location, being mindful or measuring things like tsunami warning systems and weather stations really important because we're the only sort of community on the north side of Molokai, on that whole coastline. Our presence is really important. So maintaining some of those weather stations and gauges to monitor streams and our ocean. So you'll see some projects that are related to partners who collect data. We also had a project for the St. Philomena altar. And so sometimes when we think of planning and compliance, and we've been talking about big projects that seem like big renovations and utilities, but they also can be smaller indoors, like the altar in St. Philomena Church. Again, historical, we bring in the right people to take care of and conserve, clean it, so that people can enjoy it well into the future. Another category or type of project that comes through that you might be surprised to see is the HVAC. So it's the air conditioning system on one of the newer buildings, and there aren't very many there's only like 2 new non-historical buildings. There's very few structures that are non-historical, and one of them is the museum facility. But even when the AC goes out on that, the same process for us to fix the air conditioning. So that's what the HVAC at Hale Malama is. This process doesn't just apply to historical features. It applies to everything. It also includes special use permits for filming. And we did have 2 film projects. One was for the Catholic Diocese, and one was for a Korean film crew that came to capture the story of a Korean patient. And it was called The Songs of Love. There's a picture Jessica has of Keola Beamer and these world-renowned cellists and violinists. But they came to record these songs, and it goes through the same process. Where are they filming? Is the location safe? Is there any impact of their activity on the terrain? Are there any native plants in the area? Is there any archaeology? You know, not just at the location they're requesting, but on our way to get there. What kind of equipment are they using? Is it going to impact the animals? And so you see, they were right near the beach, so we had to make sure that the activity wasn't going to disturb the monk seals who were nesting at the time. And just because it was to feature this burial site, making sure that all the other markers around it, you know, shortest distance from the road. So there's all these mitigations, that we have this rich conversation that keeps going around and around. And we can suggest back to, we worked with them to distill it down so that there was no impact. They were staying in this sort of public corridor where other people, and they captured what they needed. The point was that they got exactly what they needed and was asking from us. We just figured out how to do it with no impact and no adverse effect. And that allowed us to approve that permit. So hopefully you kind of get an idea that the process exists to move any proposed action to make sure that we are doing it in the safest way as possible. So now that you understand sort of how projects get built from beginning to end, how they're executed, that they apply to all these different activities, hopefully that makes this list less daunting and you can kind of pick that apart. I'm going to hand it over to Superintendent.
So none of this work is possible without the staff of the park. And I had mentioned earlier, when I was hired on, was the tail end of COVID. Most of the management team had moved on to other positions. We were missing supervisory level staff as well as managers. So I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of recruitment efforts and trying to fill positions. I'll start off with the hardship of that, and then I'll talk about the joys of it, because I think it's important to note, all of you are very familiar with Kalaupapa. It's remote, it's isolated. As I said, I've worked for the Park Service for a long time, mostly in similar remote, isolated locations. I will tell you, in the last 10 to 15 years, broadly across the Park Service, it is getting harder and harder and harder to hire, recruit, and retain staff in remote locations. Even with having internet access at locations, people are looking for something different in their lives. They want to be more connected to communities. So it's very difficult broadly in public lands. And that is magnified by being in Hawaii, where the cost of living, I don't need to tell you this, is very expensive. Our staff commute in on a weekly basis. Very few of our staff live on site full time. So people are really challenged by making the commitment to being at this location. I'm very grateful for the people who do make that commitment on the regular basis. I do it as well, but it is part of those challenges. Mikiala had mentioned that we are required by our very enabling legislation. So the Congress, when they negotiated creating Kalaupapa National Historical Park, a lot of what's in that creation talks about utilizing Native Hawaiians, both how we can hire them in different ways. So we have 2 special hiring authorities that just pertain to our national park site. One is for people who have had Hansen's disease. One is for Native Hawaiians. Native Hawaiians do need to meet DHHL's criteria of blood quantum to qualify. So sometimes we still are challenged to use that special hiring authority. Either somebody hasn't been able to yet document their blood quantum, or they no longer meet that criteria, although they very much feel part of the community and are connected that way. So we've been exploring some other mechanisms to utilize the local talent. So we are building the criteria to become what's called a contiguous area hiring authority, so being able to hire people in our local community using similar things to that Native Hawaiian hiring authority. Fortunately, the leaders ahead of me had some really beautiful foresight. Now, we all know the tragedies of COVID, but one of the things that happened throughout the COVID pandemic is the federal government enacted some laws that allowed us to non-competitively hire people with a special authority. So the leaders at Kalaupapa during COVID utilized this authority to hire a lot of local individuals non-competitively, people who would otherwise struggle either to get through a very complex hiring process that the government has, or maybe didn't yet have either a way to articulate their skills or hadn't yet built those skills that would allow them to compete into those positions. So we hired a fair number of people from the local community with that hiring authority. In the last 2 years, we've been working to transition those temporary positions into full-time positions with benefits. So we've been able to convert some of those positions over. We're still working through that process. If you know people who are interested and want to work for Kalaupapa, let us know and we'll help them navigate these systems. We have active recruitments all the time. Oh, yes, and we've been still utilizing a number of our intern programs, which is another way that we are able to bring in localized staff, continue to build and develop their skills so they can compete and apply for those positions as we go. The other side of that coin in our enabling legislation speaks to the development of staff. Now, the National Park Service is inherently Western, it's inherently governmental. So sometimes even if you're bringing that beautiful localized talent and skill and your technical expertise, learning how to navigate the government is not always that easy. I've been doing it for, like I said, over 20 years, and I still would not consider myself like the expert. I know a lot, but so a lot of the work we're doing is to continue to develop the staff so they can continue to show up in better, more effective ways so we can drive these conversations and things forward more efficiently. We're speaking a similar language. I think for those of us that are coming here from outside of Hawaii, we're doing the same thing in reverse. The local team is definitely developing us, and so we're sharing that conversation back and forth. And although we picked a project where it was pretty great, right? This was an easy, pretty straightforward project where there wasn't a lot of debate. We have a number of projects that don't go that smoothly, that people on our staff have concerns about. So really making a safe space within our team where people can really speak up for that resource or for that community member that might be uncomfortable to talk about, it might be difficult to talk about, it might be hard to brainstorm some mitigations. But I'm really proud to tell you I've watched this team over the last 2 years struggle through some difficult projects, have some very complex and hard conversations, and be able to come up with some really beautiful compromises. And if you don't have a question yet when we do breakouts, ask that question of the staff. What was it like to go through one of those difficult conversations? Because that's really the powerful and important work that we do. Again, I talked about those stakeholders. There's a pretty broad group of people we represent up here on the daily. And sometimes we have to represent people we don't know, but we have to think about that user group. I want to also talk about, we still have vacancies at the management level of the park. So part of my job is to think constructively of how we continue to make sure we have the right level of support and management for our team. So I'm continuing to look at strategies of how we might be able to bundle functions and positions so, again, staff have the support they need at the management level. Make sure that those teams have funding opportunities, they have management support, that they can, all their administrative support is completed behind the scenes, people get paid, all that fun stuff. So that's a little bit about our staffing. And I know somebody made a nod, I think it was Matt earlier. This work does not go unnoticed. And I think that's really important that not only do we get a lot of localized acknowledgement, so particularly our historic preservation team gets requested on a regular basis to go to other places in the state to share their knowledge and the work that they do with other organizations. The feedback I hear from that is, wow, you are the only team in the state that still preserves wood windows and doors. It's pretty easy to just put a modern window or a door in place. Our team actually takes every single window out, does them piece by piece, mills the lumber to make sure that those windows still retain that historic integrity. That is really unusual. Like I said, we are the only people, have been the only people, but we're spreading that knowledge across the state. So big recognition and kudos to that team. Also, the power of those hard conversations, or the power of the team, is we have the ability to recognize internally in the Park Service. And I had, for various reasons, was out of the park, and I saw an opportunity that was coming up to nominate staff for awards. I passed it on to the team. I was like, okay, I'm going to be back in a week. If you have anybody on the team that you think fits this requirement, that you would like to nominate for this award, please do. I had come back from my travels. The team had come together. They had decided to nominate Joe Kayama and his team for their historic preservation efforts. They moved that nomination forward, and they won the regional award. So our region encompasses everything from Arizona to Idaho, all the western states, and the Pacific Islands. That's a pretty significant award. Out of all of those places that are doing cultural preservation work, Joe Kayama and his team won that award. Several months later, we found out that they won the national award. So all of the national park sites in our country, there are over 400, lots of cultural work happening. Joe Kayama was selected. And not just for historic preservation work, but more importantly for the fact that he trains a team to further that stewardship effort going forward. So primarily it was about how is he training the next generation of stewards to do this very, very critical work. That's fundamentally, I think, even more important. Succession planning will continue to be important. Mikiala gave you some statistics about how long things have been happening at Kalaupapa. I talked about the continuum of care. It's not just us here today talking about how we steward this place, but how do we collectively steward this place long into the future when those of us that are doing the good work now are retired and doing something else. Maybe we're sitting in your chair as an advocate on the other side of this table. So it's really important that we're putting those pieces of development in place and recognizing how we move that forward. We're recruiting new talent, bringing them in as interns and moving them through. I do want to talk about one other award, which is we have our own aquifer in Kalaupapa and our own water system. We run basically a small city of utilities down there. And on the regular, Milena and his team with our utility systems wins water awards at the state level as some of the best water in the state. So if you ever get a chance to visit us, be sure to fill your water bottle because it's really good water. And then the other thing I want to mention is we work really closely with a lot of other organizations and individuals in the work they do. Some of it's because we don't own the place, right? Like we don't have full authority. But also it's so important that we're working with our partners and our other experts to advise us along the way. We do a lot of hosting. Kalaupapa has a long history of hosting. We bring a lot of people in to see the work that we're doing and talk through the logistics of that. Hopefully we'll be having some opportunities for the broader public to be doing that with us. And these larger planning processes that take a really long time and take a lot of energy to build up towards. In 2018, the Park Service started an internal process to strategize how to work with our hundreds of historic structures. It is very difficult, and I wouldn't say impossible, but maybe unrealistic, that all of those buildings would be managed the same way going into the future. So we need to think about that strategically. So in the summer of 22, we were ready to invite our agency partners and some of our nonprofit partners like Historic Hawaii Foundation to the table to broaden that conversation and to think whose kuleana are these various pieces. And so we're moving through the next strategy of like, okay, so what would that prioritization look like? So hopefully in the next year we'll be able to come forward to the broader audience with an idea of these are the things that we are committing to steward at this level, with an invitation of an opportunity for other people to help us in that stewardship as we go forward. So those bigger planning processes that take longer, that again to what Mikiala said, that sometimes it looks like we're not doing anything, but there's still movement in the background, and hopefully you'll be ready for that when it comes out.
Yeah. So that pretty much wraps up the formal presentation part of our day. If you haven't had a chance, please take a look at or pick up the handouts from Jessica there. If you have a question, you wrote it down, we're going to transition into a breakout session where we're going to kind of just split up so that we can have some really great one-on-one conversations. Kalaupapa, our community is so small, so coming out to the public can be overwhelming, but we want to make sure that we really have a chance to meet you and honor your time and, most importantly, ask your question. If for some reason you don't get to ask your question, you want to leave it with us, or if you go home and then think of something, please reach out to us. My information is on the website. You might have seen it on Facebook posts, and it's everywhere, or come and stop and see me and take it down so that you can reach out to me after this moment, because it is an ongoing conversation. Your thoughts, your questions, your input is always welcome. I'd like to thank everyone for making the time to come and hear and for being so gracious and allowing us to share our story. We are really proud of the work that we do, and this is just a sliver. This is a sliver of a sliver. Talking about it is way different than seeing it get done. If you get a chance, please look through some of the photos that we brought to kind of get an idea, bring some of these projects, into an illustrative representation. And yeah, I think that was, yes, the gray. So we're going, yes, Degree. We're going to follow the format. I know you're asking me to break the format. The questions can be submitted to me, Mikiala_Pescaya@nps.gov, Mikiala_PESCAIA@nps.gov. Anybody who's watching this, feel free to reach out to me. Mahalo nui. Aloha. Aloha.